good and evil, and that we are combined. You know, we have lived with both of those elements in our life, but they don't ever talk about humanity being utterly depraved and needing only the work of God to bring restoration. That's not a Jewish concept as they read this story about Garden of Eden. So original sin, that's a whole other topic, but I just throw that out for some time to talk about what that has done to our theology over the centuries. So that's kind of how Jay describes what the temptation to for knowledge and power and for knowing the gods of Canaan brings to Adam and Eve in the garden. That story continues then in the next chapter, in chapter 4, with the story of Cain and Abel. This is a sketch by a line drawing, a sketch by Gustave Doré, and the darkness of his style is pretty compelling. But here is Cain in the foreground and Abel in the background. What's different about their sacrifices? Can you see what's going on there? Abel's smoke is going up to heaven. Cain's smoke is just kind of lying there on the ground. Yeah, that's smoke. So that's his sacrifice that he's burning, and the smoke is just kind of there on the ground. Whereas Abel's is going up, so God can smell it, if you will. And this is a fascinating thing to do. Now, Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Why? We don't know. There is no explanation other than this, that God accepted Abel's offering of a sheep, but rejected Cain's offering of fruit of his labors, from his garden, if you will, that he tilled and cultivated, and then brought to God as a sacrifice. God has no regard for. There is no explanation for this. There's no behind the scenes kind of thing. Speculation says is that God had told Adam and Eve that if you want to do a sacrifice, the proper kind of sacrifice would be to kill an animal and offer that to me. But most likely what is going on here is that Jay, in this very early part of the story, is saying people who look to be agriculturalists and till the ground and make that to a desire after that as the way of living is not as good as the nomadic sheep herder, and so Abel as the sheep herder sacrifice is accepted, and Cain's is not. Another Doré painting, lightning in the background. And Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And so it is that we have this incredible story. My brother's keeper, of course, comes from that. And the idea here, the idea here is that by pursuing an iffy way of doing life, in this case Cain actually growing a garden rather than herding sheep, it leads to this kind of disaster. And of course, some of the most compelling artwork over the years has been trying to capture this moment when Cain kills his brother Abel. And you know what this is called? This painting is called The First Morning. Isn't that powerful? Mm-hmm. So here is Adam and Eve mourning the death of Abel, and so we have the first murder. Jay's point here is we should try to be pursuing the right kinds of things, the kinds of things that God desires. Being a sheep herder instead of growing a garden. That seems to be where it's at.
It seems to me that the idea is that it's the pride of trying to control agriculture or anything else.
Yeah, that would be part of that, part of achievement of all of those things that we looked at before, the pride and pretension and those kind of things are some of the things that Jay seems to be concerned about. So then, of course, the story goes that Seth is born to Adam and Eve, and out of the line of Seth comes the godly line, eventually out of which the Abraham is born, and then there's the Cain line, and the Cain line is just filled with tragedy and hubris and so very early on, we have this line where we see the lineage of Cain, and the first thing it says in the lineage of Cain is that Cain built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch. Now this isn't the same Enoch that was the father of Methuselah, but this is another Enoch named after a person whose name looks very much like Methuselah, but is a little bit different. It's interesting because Enoch shows up in both Seth's line and in Cain's line. But in Cain's line, one of the things that Jay would like to point out to us is that Cain built a city and named it after Enoch, his son. And now where all these people came from, I have no idea. Don't try to figure out where all these other people came to help to build a city when Cain was the only. And so eventually we then get to the 11th chapter, where things have progressed. Now, and of course, in between is the flood, where things start all over with Noah and his family. And like I said, we're going to dig into that next week as we'll actually spend the whole time looking at the flood and how it's explained. But we jump ahead to the 11th chapter here, where we have the people of God, the people. It doesn't even say who they are. It just says like all the people of the world go and they settle in the land of Shinar, and they say to themselves, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they make mortar, and they make bricks, and they build a city, and they build a tower. Come, let us build ourselves a city, and let us make a name for ourselves. And of course, part of the idea here again is that Jay is very concerned that humanity has this desire to make a name for themselves, to reach up to the heavens, to God, to be able to, and so if God says to God's self, if we let them, and it's interesting that the world, it's a plural thing here. If we let them do this, there's no telling what they'll do and what they'll try to accomplish. And so that they build, humanity builds this city, and so the Lord says, no, we can't have that, and so he confuses the languages, of course, so that they can't talk to each other. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. They stopped building the city. And so the lesson learned is part of the idea here. So again, this theme of cities are bad. Herding sheep is good. I thought I had another one in between there. Let me go back here because I don't want you to read that first. But here's part of the deal, is that as we look at this story of Jay and his story of creation and then the fall and then the temptations that accompany it and then where humanity gets itself into trouble, is from Jay's perspective. The trouble is that you look to other gods for meaning and fertility and all that, and you should only look to Yahweh for fertility and meaning and all that. And that civilization is a contributor towards that looking to other gods. And so progress is not a good thing in Jay's mind. Development of, and living in cities and moving that way is not a desirable thing. And so Jay is almost saying, he's pining for the days when Israel was living out in the desert like Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, herding their sheep and living that simple life. Or even going back to the time of Moses when they were out in the wilderness. As hard as that was, they were able to concentrate more on God then than they were once they got settled, and then they started having to live with the Canaanites, and they started building cities. And so when they get to Solomon's empire, which has all of the attributes of civilization and progress and urban living and all of that, Jay just shakes his head and said, oh, too bad, too bad, too bad. What's interesting is that this story, in juxtaposition to the first chapter, the priest's story of creation, where they basically accepted urbanization and progress without question, having lived in Babylon for all those 70 years in captivity. The priestly writer, in his take on creation, doesn't question any of that, but Jay does. And so there seems to be this juxtaposition of almost competing ideas of what humanity is about. So I bring this quote. It's a fairly lengthy quote, but I think it's worth considering. Genesis offers contrasting portraits of human existence. The urban and the pastoral Adam and Eve. The urban and pastoral. Urban being in the first chapter. The pastoral being in the second chapter. The royal couple in the first chapter, and the servant pair in the second chapter. Each portrait draws upon an important and undeniable stream of Jewish history, the agricultural urban and the pastoral nomadic. The tension between these two sets of perspectives runs through the Bible, and in a larger sense, through human history. Notice in our worship service today, we will be doing a reading from Psalm 100. The sheep of God's pasture. That pastoral theme keeps popping up. We have a picture in one of our windows is Jesus the Good Shepherd. The awkwardness of our history is the awkwardness of our being created, biblical phrasing, in the image and likeness of God in Genesis 1, out of the dust of the earth, Genesis 2. This very juxtaposition suggests that to acknowledge both sides of our Adamic nature is to be whole, is to be fully human. To lose sight of either side of our being is to lose something uniquely human and valuable. Though admittedly, in our Solomonic aspirations, we have been much more proficient at losing the sight of the second set of virtues, a simple life, shepherd, than the first, the urban agricultural life. Again, Conrad Hires from the Meaning of Creation. So to conclude, what time are we? Oh, yeah, okay. Sort of to conclude today then, do we, as urban 21st century people who enjoy progress, who have enjoyed the fruits of our human aspirations, does Jay have a point about the danger of progress? In some ways, it's almost hard for us to even conceive of that as being a danger, progress being a danger. But it's interesting that as we look at the book of Genesis, this reminder that our human aspirations are human aspirations. Are they always God's aspirations? And maybe that's always a good question to ask ourselves. Okay, I don't see Mac here. Mac Jernigan is somebody who, a friend of mine, we've had lots of conversations about this, and we've always come around back to this conversation. Is all of this progress that we are experiencing actually a good thing? And are we sometimes getting ahead of ourselves by all of the technology that we rely on and stuff like that? So that's an intriguing question. The flood. Where does this fit, and how, interestingly, was it explained by good church people in the 1600s and 1700s as the Enlightenment and science came into its own? How did they describe what was going on with the flood and how it related to what was actually the geological makeup of our world? That'll be next week. I really thought I was going to have time for more discussion today, but of course I didn't. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next week, and enjoy worship if you haven't been to it yet.